Tonight, we are tracing the complete history of the Ministry of Magic, a story that stretches across 1,000 years of hidden power, fear, ambition, reform, and survival. Settle in wherever you are, let the noise of the day drift a little farther away, and allow yourself to wander through the secret history of wizarding Britain. If you return to these journeys often, you might quietly note which night has brought you here again. If this is your first visit, you can think of it simply as Night 1. Our path begins deep beneath the streets of London, where enchanted fireplaces crackle with emerald flame, brass lifts glide through vast shafts in the earth, and thousands of bewitched paper memos flutter through the air like a flock of pale birds. Far below the city's traffic and rain-soaked pavements lies the Ministry of Magic. Visitors arriving by Flu Network emerge through green fire. Employees enter through the red telephone box visitor entrance, introduced in the 20th century. In the vast atrium, polished dark wood, gleaming golden statues, and fountains create an impression of permanence. Yet almost everything about the ministry is younger than it appears. The government that Harry Potter encountered during the Second Wizarding War was not an institution that had existed forever. It was the product of centuries of struggle, born from a moment when wizarding society decided that remaining visible to the non-magical world had become impossible. Why did wizards wait so long to build a centralized government at all? The question becomes stranger the farther back you travel. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was founded around the year 990 by Godric Gryffindor, Salazar Slytherin, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Helga Hufflepuff. By that date, wizarding communities already possessed advanced magical knowledge, complex enchantments, protected castles. Wand magic was highly developed. International travel among magical peoples occurred across Europe. Yet no ministry existed. There was no minister for magic, no department of magical law enforcement, no network of bureaucrats issuing decrees from underground offices beneath London. The wizarding world functioned through looser structures, local authority, family influence, and regional cooperation. The centuries surrounding Hogwarts' founding were not peaceful. Medieval Europe witnessed religious upheaval, dynastic conflict, and growing suspicion toward anything perceived as supernatural. In wizarding history, many later accounts describe Muggle persecution as a driving force behind secrecy, though the reality was often more complicated. The famous example preserved in wizarding historical writings is Wendelin the Weird, who allegedly enjoyed being burned at the stake so much that she allowed herself to be captured repeatedly, casting the flame-freezing charm and experiencing only a pleasant, tickling sensation. Stories like hers reveal an important truth. Individual witches and wizards could often protect themselves. The danger was not always personal survival. The danger was social instability. As magical populations expanded, disputes increasingly crossed regional boundaries. One village's magical accident could become another village's political problem. Conflicts involving magical creatures spilled across territories. Wand regulations varied. Trade practices differed from place to place. Long before the ministry emerged, Britain relied upon a governing body known as the Wizards' Council. This organization served as the closest equivalent to a national magical government. It lacked the immense bureaucracy that would come later, but it represented an attempt to coordinate wizarding affairs across the country. Historical records mention several notable members, including Burdock Muldoon and later Elfrida Clegg, figures remembered primarily for their disagreements over the classification of magical creatures. Why does a debate about magical creatures matter to the history of government? Because it exposed one of the oldest weaknesses in wizarding society. Burdock Muldoon, who served as chief of the Wizards' Council in the 14th century, classified any creature that walked on two legs as a being. The decision immediately collapsed into chaos. Goblins qualified, fairies qualified, trolls qualified, diricals qualified. Meetings became impossible to manage. Elfrida Clegg later revised the definition, replacing legs with the ability to speak a human language. That solution failed as well. Trolls learned enough words to attend. Jarves qualified. Ghosts raised difficult questions. What sounds like an amusing administrative problem reveals something deeper. Wizarding governments struggled for centuries to define who belonged within their authority. The Wizards' Council operated during a world where magical and non-magical societies still overlapped. Wizards lived among muggles in many areas. Magical businesses could be concealed, but entire communities remained visible. The boundary separating the two worlds was thinner than later generations would assume. Every outbreak of magical violence risked exposure. Every dragon sighting became a crisis. Every misuse of dangerous magic threatened to attract unwanted attention. Over time, governing wizarding Britain demanded more than settling disputes among witches and wizards. It required managing an increasingly unstable relationship with the non-magical majority. The 17th century brought that pressure to a breaking point. Across Europe, magical governments confronted the same dilemma. Communication between magical communities improved. International cooperation expanded. Wizards increasingly recognized that local solutions were failing. A dragon loose in one country could become another country's problem within days. Magical creatures crossed borders without regard for politics. Reports of anti-wizard sentiment circulated widely. At the same time, Muggle societies were becoming more organized, more populous, and technologically more capable. Even if individual witches and wizards remained difficult to harm, the challenge of remaining hidden grew more complex with every generation. Why did secrecy become the answer instead of coexistence? In 1689, representatives from magical governments began implementing what would become one of the most important laws in wizarding history, the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. The measure was not merely a recommendation. It represented a complete reorganization of magical civilization. After years of preparation, the statute officially came into force in 1692. From that moment onward, magical governments across the world accepted responsibility for hiding their populations from Muggles. Entire communities vanished from public view. Dragons became regulated. Magical creatures were concealed. Enchantments protected homes, villages, and institutions. The relationship between the two worlds changed forever. The Statute of Secrecy solved one problem and created another. Once wizarding society committed itself to permanent concealment, governance became dramatically more difficult. Someone had to investigate breaches of secrecy. Someone had to coordinate magical transportation. Someone had to regulate creatures capable of exposing the hidden world. Someone had to negotiate with foreign magical governments operating under the same statute. The Wizards' Council suddenly looked inadequate for the task ahead. A loose assembly of influential figures could not manage an entire hidden nation. What secrecy demanded was administration. What administration demanded was bureaucracy. And bureaucracy, for better or worse, would become the defining language of the Ministry of Magic. The transition did not happen overnight. Institutions rarely transformed that smoothly. Yet, by the end of the 17th century, the old order was fading. The Wizards' Council gradually gave way to a new structure designed specifically for the post-secrecy world. At its center stood a new office unlike anything that had existed before. The title was simple: Minister for Magic. The first wizard to hold that office was Ulick Gamp. His name appears only briefly in most histories, overshadowed by later figures. But his position marked the beginning of a government that would survive wars, rebellions, dark wizards, corruption scandals, and nearly complete collapse. Imagine the burden facing Ulick Gamp. The Statute of Secrecy had fundamentally altered daily life for every magical citizen in Britain. Enforcement mechanisms had to be established. Departments needed organization. Legal authority required definition. Relationships with international magical governments demanded coordination. Much of the machinery later generations took for granted did not yet exist. There were no familiar ministry departments in their finished forms. No vast bureaucracy stretched beneath London. The foundations had to be laid piece by piece. In many ways, the first Minister for Magic was less a politician than an architect, designing an entirely new civilization hidden inside an old one. And so, while London's streets bustled above with merchants, sailors, nobles, and laborers who never suspected what lay beneath their feet, the first stones of a secret government were being set into place. The Wizards' Council was passing into history. The Ministry of Magic was being born. Yet even as its earliest officials celebrated the success of the Statute of Secrecy, another question lingered in the shadows. If the ministry had been created to protect Wizarding Britain, who would protect the ministry itself once power began to accumulate within its walls? Why was the first ministry designed less like a kingdom and more like a sprawling bureaucracy? At first glance, that question feels almost strange. Wizarding Britain possessed powerful families, ancient bloodlines, and institutions older than most Muggle nations. The founders of Hogwarts were remembered with near-mythic reverence. The Wizengamot already existed in some form long before the ministry itself. Yet when Ulick Gamp became the first Minister for Magic in 1707, he did not establish a royal court. He did not crown himself. He did not create a hereditary office. Instead, the emerging ministry focused on departments, regulations, records, investigations, and administration. It behaved less like a magical monarchy and more like a machine built to keep an invisible society functioning day after day. The answer lies in the challenge created by the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. Hiding a civilization required constant maintenance. Every accidental transformation, every rogue magical creature, every improperly performed spell near Muggles created work. The ministry needed people who could erase memories, investigate incidents, issue permits, monitor transportation networks, and coordinate responses across the country. Magical government became practical before it became grand. Behind every famous minister stood clerks copying records, investigators pursuing violations, and officials trying to prevent disasters that most citizens would never learn had occurred. The hidden world survived because thousands of small problems were solved before they became public catastrophes. One of the earliest pillars of this system evolved into the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. By the time Harry Potter entered the ministry centuries later, this department occupied an entire level of the ministry headquarters and contained offices for the Auror Office, the Improper Use of Magic Office, and the Wizengamot Administration Services. Its roots stretched back to the earliest days of organized magical government. Laws meant little without enforcement. The ministry needed investigators capable of pursuing dark wizards, resolving magical crimes, and maintaining order. While later generations would associate magical law enforcement with famous aurors such as Alastor Moody, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and Nymphadora Tonks, the foundations of that tradition were established long before Voldemort's rise. Another challenge involved accidents. Magic is powerful, but it is rarely perfect. Potions explode, charms misfire, creatures escape, enchantments behave unpredictably. Over time, the ministry developed what became the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. By Harry's era, this department included the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad and the Obliviator Headquarters. These offices dealt directly with the consequences of magical mistakes. A dragon appearing over a village could not simply be ignored. A giant accidentally seen by Muggles required immediate intervention. The ministry's survival increasingly depended on its ability to make extraordinary events disappear before ordinary people noticed them. Why did magical creatures become one of the government's greatest headaches? The answer can be found in centuries of unresolved disputes. Goblins possessed intelligence, culture, and political ambitions. Centaurs maintained their own traditions and often rejected wizard authority. Werewolves occupied an uneasy position between human society and dangerous transformation. House elves existed within a system that many witches and wizards accepted without question, while others, like Hermione Granger centuries later, would challenge it fiercely. Every group forced the ministry to confront a difficult issue. Was the government ruling over magical Britain or merely over witches and wizards? The distinction mattered more than officials often admitted. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures emerged from exactly these tensions. Eventually, it would contain divisions responsible for beasts, beings, and spirits. The very structure of the department reflected centuries of debate dating back to figures such as Burdock Muldoon and Elfrida Clegg. Even then, the classifications remained imperfect. Centaurs technically qualified as beings, but requested beast status to avoid ministry interference. Merpeople received recognition under specific definitions. Ghosts occupied an unusual position altogether. Administrative categories tried to simplify a magical world that resisted simplification at every turn. As the 18th century progressed, another department gained increasing importance: the Department of International Magical Cooperation. The Statute of Secrecy was not a British project, it was global. Ministries and magical governments across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas faced similar problems. International standards became necessary. Dragon reservations required coordination. Quidditch regulations crossed borders. Trade agreements affected magical economies. By the modern era, this department would oversee relationships with organizations such as the International Confederation of Wizards, ensuring that Britain's hidden government remained connected to the wider magical world. Yet perhaps the most fascinating institution was not a department at all. It was the Wiesengemot. By Harry's time, members sat in plum-colored robes embroidered with silver symbols. The chamber itself resembled an ancient court, and when Harry faced trial in 1995 for performing the Patronus charm before Dudley Dursley, it was the Wiesengemot that judged him. Unlike many ministry departments, the Wiesengemot carried the weight of older traditions. Historians continue debating exactly how much continuity existed between the medieval Wizards' Council and the later Wiesengemot. What is clear is that the body represented something older than the ministry itself. Governments changed. Ministers came and went. The Wiesengemot endured. Why did the Wiesengemot survive while so many earlier institutions disappeared? Part of the answer lies in legitimacy. New governments often seek authority by connecting themselves to older traditions. The ministry needed continuity. It needed citizens to believe that the transition from the Wizards' Council to modern government had not severed the past entirely. The Wiesengemot provided that bridge. Ancient legal customs could coexist with modern administration. Old authority could support new power. The result was a system that looked surprisingly stable from the outside, even while enormous changes unfolded beneath the surface. The growth of ministry authority also transformed the lives of ordinary witches and wizards. Regulations expanded, records accumulated, licenses became necessary for certain activities. The ministry's influence reached transportation, magical creatures, education, trade, and law enforcement. Most citizens likely accepted these changes because the benefits were visible. The hidden world remained hidden. Large-scale exposure became rare. Magical disasters were managed quickly. Daily life became more predictable. Stability, once established, often convinces people that it has always existed. By the 19th century, the ministry had become something remarkable. What began as a response to the Statute of Secrecy had evolved into one of the most sophisticated magical governments in the world. Yet beneath its growing confidence lurked a contradiction. The ministry regulated magical creatures, enforced magical law, and negotiated international agreements. It claimed authority over nearly every aspect of wizarding life. And still, deep within its own headquarters, there existed a department studying forces so mysterious that even the government itself barely understood them. The Department of Mysteries occupied Level 9 of the ministry. Visitors rarely entered. Employees known as unspeakables spoke little about their work. Black doors concealed rooms devoted to time, death, thought, love, and space. Most ministry officials had no idea what happened there. The government that regulated magical Britain possessed a secret chamber at its heart. And inside that chamber, some of the greatest mysteries in the wizarding world remained unsolved. The deeper the ministry's power grew, the more striking that contradiction became. For all its laws and regulations, even the ministry stood before certain forces with more questions than answers. How can the ministry regulate magic when its own deepest department studies forces it does not fully understand? The question hangs over the Department of Mysteries like the blue glow that once illuminated its circular chamber of black doors. When Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, Ginny Weasley, Neville Longbottom, and Luna Lovegood entered the department in June of 1996, they discovered something extraordinary. At the center stood a constantly rotating room lined with identical black doors, a design that left intruders disoriented and uncertain of their path. Beyond those doors lay chambers, dedicated not to ordinary government business, but to the greatest mysteries of existence itself. The ministry could issue regulations governing broomsticks and flu travel, yet hidden beneath its headquarters were researchers attempting to understand death, time, thought, love, and the structure of the universe. The unspeakables remain among the most mysterious figures in wizarding history. Rowling revealed remarkably little about them, which has only increased fascination around their work. Their title itself suggests silence. Information about their research is carefully guarded. Most ministry employees never learn what happens on Level 9. The secrecy serves a practical purpose. Knowledge can be dangerous. Few examples illustrate this better than the Time Room, where rows of clocks measured time in countless forms, from tiny watches to towering grandfather clocks, whose ticking echoed through the chamber like distant footsteps. Inside that room, Harry and his friends witnessed strange magical phenomena. A glass-fronted cabinet contained a hummingbird that continually aged, died, returned to an egg, and hatched again. Time did not behave normally there. More importantly, the room stored time turners, the devices that allowed controlled travel through time. Hermione Granger used one during the 1993 to 1994 school year after Professor McGonagall secured special permission from the ministry. With it, Hermione attended multiple classes simultaneously. Later, she and Harry used the device to rescue Sirius Black and Buckbeak. The ministry's willingness to distribute even limited access to time manipulation remains one of the most astonishing decisions in wizarding governance. Why would any government allow the existence of objects capable of altering the past? The answer may lie in caution. Time turners were tightly regulated. Ministry records tracked their use. Travel was restricted to short periods. Wizards understood the dangers involved. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Hermione warned repeatedly that changing the past could produce disastrous consequences. Later writings by Rowling revealed examples of witches and wizards who became trapped in paradoxes, erased themselves from existence, or caused catastrophic disruptions through reckless experimentation. The unspeakables studied time not because they controlled it completely, but because they feared what ignorance might unleash. If the Time Room represented humanity's struggle against chronology, the Death Chamber confronted something even more profound. At its center stood a stone dais supporting an ancient archway draped with a tattered black veil. Harry heard whispers beyond it. Luna heard them too. Others could not. Sirius Black fell through the veil during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries after being struck by Bellatrix Lestrange's curse. He did not emerge. Unlike many magical deaths, Sirius's passing remains deeply unsettling because the veil itself was never fully explained. The ministry possessed an object linked somehow to death itself, yet even its own researchers continued studying it centuries after the department's creation. Many readers have wondered whether the veil predates the ministry entirely, The chamber resembles an ancient amphitheater. The archway appears far older than the surrounding building. A popular fan theory suggests that the veil was discovered rather than created, perhaps a relic from an age before organized magical government existed. Canon never confirms this idea. What canon does establish is the generations of unspeakables examined the veil without exhausting its secrets. The ministry literally built part of its headquarters around a mystery it could not solve. There is something almost poetic in that image. The government devoted to controlling magical society rests atop unanswered questions. Another chamber contained what Dumbledore famously described as the most mysterious force in existence: love. During his conversation with Harry in the headmaster's office, after the battle, Dumbledore explained that the Department of Mysteries studied love because it remained more powerful and more terrible than many forms of magic. This was not sentimental philosophy. The entire Harry Potter saga repeatedly demonstrates the truth of his claim. Lily Potter's sacrificial protection saved her son from Voldemort's killing curse. Harry's willingness to sacrifice himself in the Forbidden Forest extended protection to others during the Battle of Hogwarts. Voldemort, incapable of understanding love, repeatedly underestimated its power. The Unspeakables investigated it because magical history proved that it could shape destinies as profoundly as any spell. The Hall of Prophecy formed another crucial section of the department. Endless shelves stretched into darkness, holding glass orbs that contained recorded prophecies. Most remained untouched for decades or centuries. One sphere held the prophecy made by Sybil Trelawney concerning Harry Potter and Voldemort. It was this object that lured Harry to the Ministry in 1996. The room reveals another surprising responsibility of government. The Ministry did not merely enforce laws. It collected knowledge. It archived information that could influence future generations. Entire destinies sat quietly upon shelves, waiting for the rare individuals whose lives they concerned. Why did the Department of Mysteries survive every political upheaval that shook the ministry? Ministers came and went, policies changed, wars erupted, yet the unspeakables endured. Part of the answer lies in necessity. Governments often concern themselves with immediate problems. Researchers focus on questions whose answers may require generations. The ministry needed both. It required aurors to pursue dark wizards and bureaucrats to process regulations, but it also required scholars willing to investigate mysteries whose significance might not become clear for centuries. The Department of Mysteries functioned as the government's memory, laboratory, and philosophical frontier all at once. Yet while the Unspeakables explored death and time beneath London, another challenge demanded the ministry's attention above ground. No department, however secretive, could ignore the growing tensions between wizarding society and the magical beings who lived within it. Goblins continued demanding recognition. Centaurs withdrew deeper into their territories. Werewolves faced increasing discrimination. The ministry possessed authority on parchment and in law books, but authority is not the same as loyalty. Across the 18th and 19th centuries, wizarding Britain would discover that governing magical creatures was far more difficult than classifying them. Was the ministry created to protect magical society, or primarily to protect wizard supremacy within it? Few questions reveal more about the hidden tensions of wizarding history. Official ministry records often present the government as a neutral guardian of order, responsible for maintaining the statute of secrecy and preserving peace. Yet when you examine centuries of conflicts involving goblins, centaurs, werewolves, merpeople, and other magical beings, a more complicated picture emerges. The ministry's laws were written largely by witches and wizards. Its departments were controlled by witches and wizards. Its understanding of civilization itself was often shaped by wizard priorities. To many magical creatures, the ministry may have looked less like a government for everyone and more like a government governing everyone else. No group illustrates this tension more clearly than the goblins. By the time Harry Potter first entered Gringotts Wizarding Bank in 1991, goblins already occupied a unique position in Wizarding Britain. They controlled the nation's most important financial institution. They possessed extraordinary skill in metalwork and enchantment. Goblin-made objects were renowned throughout the magical world. The Sword of Gryffindor, one of the most famous magical artifacts in existence, had been forged by the Goblin King Ragnuk I. Yet despite their intelligence and influence, relations between goblins and wizard governments remained strained for centuries. Wizarding history is marked by repeated goblin rebellions. Hogwarts students studied them in History of Magic, often to their great boredom under Professor Binns. The dates stretch across centuries. Rebellions occurred in 1612, 1752, and numerous other periods. The causes varied, but recurring themes appear again and again. Goblins objected to restrictions on wand ownership. They disputed wizard concepts of property. They resisted political arrangements that left them subject to laws they did not create. What wizards regarded as legitimate governance, many goblins regarded as domination. The ministry inherited these tensions from earlier centuries and never fully resolved them. One disagreement reveals how differently the two cultures viewed the world. Wizards believed that ownership passed permanently through purchase, inheritance, or gift. Goblins often believed that crafted objects ultimately belonged to their creator and should return to goblin possession after the owner's death. This dispute became central to the history of the Sword of Gryffindor. Goblins maintained that Ragnuk I had been cheated when the sword remained with Godric Gryffindor. Wizards rejected that claim. Centuries later, these conflicting beliefs still shaped interactions between goblins and wizarding society. A disagreement over ownership became a disagreement about civilization itself. The ministry attempted to manage these disputes through regulation, negotiation, and occasionally force. Success remained limited. Goblins retained considerable independence through institutions such as Gringotts. At the same time, distrust persisted on both sides. During the events of Deathly Hallows, Harry encountered this distrust firsthand through Griphook. Although Griphook ultimately assisted Harry's mission to retrieve a Horcrux from Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, his motivations reflected long-standing goblin grievances. He viewed the Sword of Gryffindor through a very different cultural lens than Harry did. The conversation echoed arguments that had existed for centuries. Why did centaurs choose distance rather than rebellion? Unlike goblins, centaurs generally avoided direct political confrontation. The centaur herd living in the Forbidden Forest near Hogwarts offers one of the clearest examples. Figures such as Ferenzi, Bane, Ronan, and Megorian possessed intelligence equal to any human wizard. They studied astronomy, interpreted celestial movements, and maintained their own traditions. Yet most centaurs wanted little involvement with the ministry. Their distrust ran deep. Ministry classifications technically recognize centaurs as beings, but the centaurs themselves requested classification that minimized official interference. The conflict surrounding Ferenzi demonstrates how sharply centaur values differed from those of wizards. When Ferenzi agreed to teach divination at Hogwarts after Albus Dumbledore offered him protection, many members of his herd regarded the decision as betrayal. To them, excessive involvement with human affairs violated important principles. The ministry often interpreted centaur isolation as stubbornness. Centaurs often interpreted ministry attention as arrogance. Both sides viewed the other through assumptions that rarely led to understanding. The story of werewolves is darker still. Unlike goblins or centaurs, werewolves were biologically human for most of the month. Their condition became dangerous only during transformation at the full moon, yet fear shaped policy more than nuance. By the 20th century, ministry regulations imposed severe restrictions on werewolves. Employment opportunities became scarce, registration requirements increased, social stigma intensified. Few examples illustrate the consequences more clearly than the life of Remus Lupin. Remus was bitten as a child by Fenrir Greyback, the most notorious werewolf in modern wizarding history. Greyback deliberately targeted children, hoping to create more werewolves and spread fear throughout wizarding society. His brutality reinforced existing prejudices. As a result, even individuals like Lupin, intelligent, compassionate, and deeply moral, struggled to find work. Dolores Umbridge later helped pass anti-werewolf legislation that further marginalized people like him. The ministry justified many of these policies as public safety measures. Their human cost was undeniable. Why did fear repeatedly triumph over fairness inside the ministry? The answer often lies in politics. Governments are rarely judged by how they treat minorities during calm periods. They are judged during crises. Whenever danger increased, public anxiety demanded visible action. Restrictive policies appeared decisive. Nuanced solutions appeared risky. Ministers seeking stability frequently chose measures that reassured the majority, even when those measures deepened injustice. The pattern would repeat many times throughout ministry history. And yet the magical world remained too interconnected for separation to succeed completely. Goblins managed wizarding wealth. Centaurs participated in crucial battles when circumstances demanded it. Werewolves existed within wizarding families and communities. Magical creatures could not simply be categorized and ignored. Every attempt to do so eventually failed. The ministry's relationship with magical beings became one of its longest-running challenges, a problem inherited by every generation of officials who entered office. As the 19th century advanced, however, another force began reshaping the ministry from within. The government was growing larger, wealthier, and more influential than ever before. Ministers gained increasing authority over daily life. Departments expanded, records accumulated, new laws appeared. Behind the scenes, a handful of leaders would leave marks upon the institution so deep that their decisions continued shaping wizarding Britain. long after their names faded from public memory. How much of wizarding history was shaped not by famous heroes, but by forgotten ministers whose names few remember? Ask the average Hogwarts student about great figures from the past, and they are likely to mention Merlin, Albus Dumbledore, Harry Potter, or perhaps Godric Gryffindor. Very few would name the ministers for magic who spent decades steering the government through wars, reforms, economic crises, and political upheavals. Yet these officials helped determine how wizarding Britain functioned from one generation to the next. Their signatures appeared on laws, their policies influenced schools, courts, and international relations. While dark wizards often dominate historical memory, the ministry itself was shaped just as profoundly by administrators whose portraits hung quietly on office walls. One of the most remarkable examples is Ferris Spavin. His tenure as Minister for Magic lasted from 1865 until 1903, an extraordinary 38 years in office. By the end of his career, he was so elderly that some accounts describe him attempting to shake hands with a passing hoaxer whom he mistakenly believed was a member of the public. The image is almost comical, but it reveals something important. Spavin governed during a period of relative stability. Wizarding Britain experienced no Voldemort, no Grindelwald, and no catastrophic collapse of government during his administration. As a result, his long service allowed the ministry to strengthen its institutions in ways that later generations would take for granted. Stability often leaves fewer dramatic stories than war, but it can be equally important. Under long-serving ministers, bureaucracies become entrenched. Departments gain authority, procedures become standard. Citizens grow accustomed to government involvement in daily life. By the late 19th century, the ministry had become an enormous administrative structure. The image of a hidden nation governed from beneath London was no longer an experiment. It was reality. Children grew up assuming that magical law enforcement, international cooperation, and creature regulation had always existed in their familiar forms. Another influential figure was Grogan Stump, who served as minister from 1811 to 1819. His name appears repeatedly in discussions of magical creature classification. Stump attempted to establish more workable definitions for beings and beasts after centuries of confusion. Under his framework, a being became any creature that has sufficient intelligence to understand the laws of the magical community and to bear part of the responsibility in shaping those laws. The wording was imperfect, disputes continued, yet it represented a genuine effort to create a more rational relationship between government and magical creatures. Even centuries later, elements of his thinking remained embedded within ministry structures. Why do governments often remember reformers less vividly than warriors? Part of the answer is narrative. Battles create heroes and villains. Administrative reforms create paperwork. Yet Grogan Stump's decisions influenced the daily lives of magical beings long after many famous duels had faded into obscurity. A classification system may not inspire songs or legends, but it shapes how institutions behave. The ministry's power rested not only upon spectacular events, but upon countless rules quietly guiding everyday life. The 19th century also witnessed increasing integration between British wizarding government and the wider magical world. International magical travel became more common. Diplomatic relationships expanded. The International Confederation of Wizards grew in significance. As magical populations across the globe operated under the statute of secrecy, cooperation became essential. Dragons did not respect national borders. Magical diseases spread across regions. Trade linked distant communities. The ministry could no longer think solely in domestic terms. Britain had become part of a hidden international order. This growing interconnectedness produced new opportunities and new anxieties. Wizarding governments shared information, but they also competed for influence. Political disagreements crossed borders. Different nations interpreted magical law in different ways. Some ministries favored stricter regulation. Others tolerated greater independence. The British ministry often viewed itself as one of the most sophisticated magical governments in the world, a perception that occasionally shaded into arrogance. Such confidence would later be tested by events far beyond Britain's shores. Why did the 20th century transform magical politics so dramatically? One answer can be found in the rise of a wizard whose ambitions extended far beyond any single nation. In the late 19th century, a child named Gellert Grindelwald was born. He would eventually become one of the most dangerous dark wizards in history. Unlike Voldemort, whose ambitions focused heavily upon Britain, Grindelwald operated on an international scale. His ideology challenged the very foundations of the hidden world established by the statute of secrecy. He did not simply seek power. He sought a new order. Grindelwald believed that wizards should emerge from hiding and rule openly for the greater good. The phrase became infamous. To his followers, it promised liberation and progress. To his opponents, it justified tyranny. His movement spread across Europe during the early decades of the 20th century. Magical governments watched with growing alarm as his influence expanded. For the first time since the implementation of the statute of secrecy, a powerful figure threatened not merely a ministry or a region, but the entire international system upon which modern wizarding civilization rested. The British ministry initially observed events from a distance. Grindelwald's strongest bases of support lay elsewhere in Europe, yet distance offered little comfort. The Department of International Magical Cooperation monitored developments closely. Foreign ministries exchanged information. Security concerns intensified. Every government operating under the statute of secrecy understood what was at stake. If Grindelwald succeeded, centuries of hidden coexistence with the Muggle world could unravel. The consequences would reach far beyond politics. At the center of this growing storm stood a man who was not yet universally recognized as the greatest wizard of his age. Albus Dumbledore had once been Grindelwald's friend. As young men, they shared intellectual ambitions and dreams of transforming the world. Their relationship ended in tragedy after the confrontation that resulted in the death of Dumbledore's sister, Ariana. For decades afterward, Dumbledore avoided facing Grindelwald directly. The reasons remain one of the most emotionally complex chapters in wizarding history. Personal guilt, grief, and fear intertwined with political necessity. By the 1930s and early 1940s, however, avoidance was no longer possible. Grindelwald's power continued growing. His followers expanded their influence across magical Europe. Ministries strengthened security measures. International cooperation deepened. The British ministry, like many others, increasingly devoted resources toward monitoring external threats. A government originally created to enforce secrecy was becoming something more. It was evolving into a modern security state, concerned not only with administration but with survival. Yet even as ministers and diplomats focused on the danger abroad, another threat was quietly growing within Britain itself. He was not yet called Lord Voldemort. He was a student, walking the corridors of Hogwarts, a boy named Tom Marvolo Riddle. While governments watched Grindelwald, they failed to notice that a future darkness was already taking shape much closer to home. How did the most powerful magical government in Britain fail to recognize the greatest dark wizard in centuries until it was almost too late? The question becomes more unsettling the closer you examine Tom Riddle's early life. He did not emerge from nowhere. He attended Hogwarts from 1938 to 1945. Professors knew him. Students admired him. Headmaster Armando Dippet regarded him as an exceptionally gifted young wizard. Horace Slughorn welcomed him into the Slug Club. Even Albus Dumbledore, who harbored concerns from their first meeting at Wool's orphanage, could not fully predict the scale of what Riddle would become. The future Lord Voldemort grew up not outside wizarding society, but within its most respected institutions. Tom Riddle excelled at almost everything he attempted. He was handsome, intelligent, polite when necessary, and extraordinarily skilled with magic. Fellow students often saw him as a model pupil. Teachers praised his academic performance. Yet beneath that carefully constructed image lay a personality already marked by manipulation, cruelty, and a hunger for power. During his school years, he uncovered the truth about his ancestry, learned of Salazar Slytherin's bloodline, and opened the Chamber of Secrets. The attacks that terrorized Hogwarts in 1942 and 1943 resulted in the death of Myrtle Warren, later known as Moaning Myrtle. Even then, Riddle escaped suspicion by framing Rubeus Hagrid and his pet, Acromantula Aragog. The ministry accepted the explanation. Hagrid was expelled. The chamber was believed closed. The crisis ended, at least officially. Looking back, the episode reveals a pattern that would repeat throughout ministry history. Faced with uncertainty, officials often preferred a convincing answer to a correct one. Hagrid appeared guilty enough. The immediate danger seemed resolved. The institution moved forward. Few paused to consider whether the evidence truly fit the conclusion. In later decades, similar mistakes would have far greater consequences. After leaving Hogwarts, Riddle briefly worked at Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley. There he demonstrated another talent, persuasion. Wealthy witches and wizards trusted him. Clients welcomed him into their homes. During this period, he visited Hepzibah Smith, descendant of Helga Hufflepuff, and learned about two extraordinary artifacts, the Cup of Hufflepuff and Salazar Slytherin's locket. Soon afterward, Hepzibah died under suspicious circumstances. The ministry never connected the death to the young man who had recently visited her. Once again, Riddle slipped through the cracks of a system that saw only what it expected to see. Why was Voldemort able to hide his transformation for so long? Part of the answer lies in how gradually it occurred. The terrifying figure Harry Potter would eventually face did not appear overnight. Years passed between Tom Riddle's departure from Hogwarts and Lord Voldemort's emergence as a public threat. During that time, he traveled widely. Dumbledore later speculated that he explored remote regions, sought forbidden knowledge, and delved deeper into the dark arts than almost any wizard before him. His physical appearance changed, his followers increased, his ambitions expanded. By the time the wizarding world recognized him as Voldemort, the transformation was already well advanced. The creation of Horcruxes played a central role in this evolution. While the Ministry never fully understood what Voldemort had done, Dumbledore eventually pieced together the truth. Through repeated acts of murder and dark magic, Voldemort split his soul and concealed fragments within objects such as Tom Riddle's diary, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, Salazar Slytherin's locket, Helga Hufflepuff's cup, Rowena Ravenclaw's lost diadem, and later Nagini. The Ministry's ignorance regarding Horcruxes was understandable. The subject was obscure, dangerous, and largely absent from mainstream magical education. Yet that ignorance gave Voldemort an advantage unlike anything previous dark wizards had possessed. By the 1970s, Voldemort's influence had spread throughout Britain. His followers called themselves Death Eaters. Many concealed their identities behind masks and robes during attacks. Others maintained respectable public lives while secretly serving his cause. Lucius Malfoy moved within elite circles. Augustus Rookwood worked inside the Ministry itself. Severus Snape eventually joined the Death Eaters after leaving Hogwarts. The movement's strength came not only from magical power, but from infiltration. Voldemort understood something many governments forget. Institutions can be weakened from within long before they are defeated from without. Why did fear become one of Voldemort's greatest weapons? During the First Wizarding War, uncertainty infected daily life. People disappeared. Families distrusted neighbors. Imperious curses made loyalty difficult to judge. Anyone might be acting under magical compulsion. The Ministry struggled to distinguish allies from enemies. Aurors faced impossible choices. Emergency powers expanded. Barty Crouch Sr., then head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, authorized increasingly aggressive measures. Aurors received permission to use tactics that would have been unthinkable during peacetime. Desperation altered the government's behavior. Harold Mincham served as Minister for Magic during much of this turbulent period. History tends to remember him as a leader overwhelmed by circumstances. Voldemort's rise exposed weaknesses that had accumulated over generations. The Ministry was effective at regulating ordinary life. It excelled at managing bureaucracy. It could classify creatures, issue permits, and investigate routine crimes. Confronting a charismatic dark wizard commanding a secret army required different strengths altogether. Institutions built for stability often struggle when faced with revolutionary threats. One consequence of the war was the growing prestige of Albus Dumbledore. While the Ministry fought Voldemort through official channels, many citizens increasingly viewed Dumbledore as the wizard most capable of opposing him. His defeat of Grindelwald in 1945 had already secured his reputation. His understanding of Voldemort surpassed that of nearly anyone else. Yet Dumbledore never sought political office. On multiple occasions, he declined the position of Minister for Magic. The decision remains one of the most consequential refusals in wizarding history. By remaining outside government, he preserved independence, but also left the ministry to confront crises without his direct leadership. Then, on the night of October 31st, 1981, everything changed. Voldemort entered the home of James and Lily Potter in Godric's Hollow. James died attempting to defend his family. Lily sacrificed herself for her son. Voldemort cast the killing curse at Harry Potter, and the curse rebounded. The Dark Lord vanished. His followers scattered. The First Wizarding War ended not through military victory, but through an event that almost nobody understood. Even the ministry struggled to explain what had happened. The celebrations that followed were genuine. Wizards and witches filled streets, exchanged owls, and embraced strangers. For the first time in years, fear loosened its grip, yet beneath the relief lay a dangerous assumption. Many believed Voldemort was gone forever. The ministry embraced that conclusion eagerly. It was comforting, it was politically useful, and it was wrong. Hidden in forests, abandoned buildings, and dark corners of the magical world, a weakened Voldemort survived. The government that had failed to recognize his rise would soon make another mistake. It would underestimate the possibility of his return. Was Cornelius Fudge truly incompetent? Or was he simply the product of a system that feared panic more than truth? Few figures in ministry history provoke such divided judgments. When Cornelius Oswald Fudge became Minister for Magic in 1990, he did not appear destined for infamy. He was experienced, politically skilled, and generally regarded as a safe choice. During Harry Potter's early years at Hogwarts, Fudge often seemed almost reassuring. He visited schools, attended public events, and maintained cordial relationships with Albus Dumbledore. Yet over time, his administration would become a case study in how governments can misread danger even when evidence stands directly before them. The first major warning came in 1993 with the escape of Sirius Black from Azkaban. Until that moment, Azkaban had maintained a terrifying reputation as an inescapable prison. Guarded by Dementors, isolated in the North Sea, and designed to crush hope itself, it represented one of the ministry's most powerful symbols of authority. Sirius became the first known wizard to escape unaided. The event shook public confidence. Fudge responded with urgency, deploying Dementors throughout Britain and even around Hogwarts. The decision reflected a familiar instinct. Faced with fear, the ministry turned towards stronger security measures. The irony, of course, is that Sirius Black was innocent. Peter Pettigrew, not Sirius, had betrayed James and Lily Potter, yet the ministry never conducted a proper trial. Barty Crouch Sr. had sent Sirius directly to Azkaban during the chaos following the First Wizarding War. No formal hearing examined the evidence. No opportunity for defense existed. Years later, when the truth began emerging, the ministry struggled to accept it. The case exposed a disturbing reality. Institutions that move quickly during crises often sacrifice accuracy for certainty. Why did so many officials accept flawed conclusions so easily? The answer lies partly in collective memory. The First Wizarding War had traumatized Wizarding Britain. Citizens wanted clear villains and reassuring narratives. Sirius Black fit the role perfectly. He was believed to be Voldemort's lieutenant, responsible for betraying the Potters and murdering 13 people. The story felt complete. Questioning it required reopening wounds that society preferred to leave closed. Governments often reflect the emotional needs of the populations they govern. The Tri-Wizard Tournament of 1994 to 1995 offered another glimpse into ministry priorities. Revived after more than 2 centuries, the tournament brought together Hogwarts, Beauxbatons Academy of Magic, and Durmstrang Institute. Officials viewed it as a symbol of international cooperation. The Department of International Magical Cooperation invested considerable effort into its success. Yet beneath the pageantry, darker events unfolded. Barty Crouch Jr. infiltrated Hogwarts while disguised as Alastor Moody through the use of Polyjuice Potion. Harry Potter's unexpected selection as a 4th champion triggered controversy. Warnings accumulated, but the ministry largely focused on preserving the tournament's prestige. Everything changed in the graveyard at Little Hangleton. During the final task, Harry and Cedric Diggory touched the Tri-Wizard Cup, which had been transformed into a portkey. Cedric was murdered by Peter Pettigrew on Voldemort's orders. Voldemort regained a physical body using Harry's blood, his father's bone, and a servant's flesh. Harry escaped and returned to Hogwarts carrying Cedric's body. He told the truth immediately. Albus Dumbledore believed him. Severus Snape believed him. Minerva McGonagall believed him. Cornelius Fudge did not. Why did Fudge reject evidence that now seems overwhelming? At first glance, the decision appears irrational. Harry had survived repeated encounters with Voldemort. Dumbledore was widely regarded as the most trustworthy wizard in Britain. Witnesses existed. Signs accumulated rapidly, yet Fudge viewed the situation through a political lens. Accepting Voldemort's return would mean acknowledging that the ministry had failed to protect the public. It would require mobilization, emergency measures, and widespread alarm. Worse, it threatened stability. Fudge feared the consequences of the truth more than the consequences of denial. The Daily Prophet became a crucial battlefield during this period. Under editor Barnabas Cuff, the newspaper often reflected ministry perspectives, especially when officials provided information. Articles portrayed Harry as unstable and attention-seeking. Dumbledore was depicted as aging and unreliable. Public opinion shifted. Many witches and wizards preferred comforting explanations over frightening realities. The ministry did not need to silence every critic. It merely needed to encourage doubt. Uncertainty became a political tool. One of the clearest expressions of this strategy arrived in the form of Dolores Jane Umbridge. Appointed senior undersecretary to the minister and later Hogwarts High Inquisitor, Umbridge represented bureaucratic authority at its most rigid. She dressed in pink, decorated her office with moving plates of kittens, and spoke in a sugary voice. Beneath that appearance lay unwavering loyalty to ministry control. Educational decree after educational decree expanded her power. She inspected teachers, controlled curriculum, punished dissent. Eventually she became headmistress of Hogwarts itself. Her rise revealed how fear of losing authority can push institutions toward increasingly intrusive behavior. Why did Hogwarts become such an important target? Because control of information often determines control of the future. Dumbledore wanted students prepared for the possibility of war. Umbridge insisted that practical defensive magic was unnecessary. The ministry's official position required minimizing Voldemort's threat. Teaching students to expect conflict contradicted that narrative. The resulting tension gave birth to Dumbledore's Army, a secret student organization led by Harry. While the ministry focused on preserving appearances, teenagers quietly prepared for realities their government refused to acknowledge. The illusion finally shattered in June 1996. Lured by false visions planted by Voldemort, Harry and several friends entered the Department of Mysteries seeking Sirius Black. Death Eaters arrived. A battle erupted among the prophecy shelves. Members of the Order of the Phoenix joined the fight. Sirius died after falling through the veil in the death chamber. Then in the ministry atrium itself, Cornelius Fudge witnessed something he had spent a year denying. He saw Lord Voldemort with his own eyes. There could be no more excuses. In a single night, the political landscape changed. Fudge's campaign of denial collapsed. The ministry publicly acknowledged Voldemort's return. Newspapers reversed course. Emergency measures began. Yet the damage was already done. Valuable time had been lost. Voldemort had rebuilt his forces, infiltrated institutions, and expanded his influence while officials argued over reality. Cornelius Fudge would soon leave office, replaced by a very different leader. But the new Minister for Magic was inheriting a government already under siege, and the storm gathering over Britain was only beginning. What exact moment did the ministry cease defending wizarding Britain and begin losing control of it? Historians could argue for several answers. Some might point to the night Voldemort regained his body in Little Hangleton. Others might choose the year Cornelius Fudge spent denying the truth. Yet there is a strong case for the summer of 1996, when the ministry finally acknowledged Voldemort's return and discovered that recognition alone solved nothing. The enemy was no longer a rumor. He was real, organized, and already moving faster than the government attempting to stop him. From that point onward, the ministry entered a struggle it would never fully control. Following Fudge's resignation, Rufus Scrimgeour became Minister for Magic. Before assuming office, Scrimgeour had served as head of the Auror Office. Unlike his predecessor, he understood the nature of the threat. He did not deny Voldemort's existence. He did not dismiss warnings from the Order of the Phoenix. His problem was different. Scrimgeour inherited a government whose credibility had been damaged and whose institutions had already been penetrated by Death Eater influence. He stepped into leadership during wartime, and wartime rarely offers easy choices. The contrast between Fudge and Scrimgeour is striking. Fudge projected reassurance even when circumstances demanded alarm. Scrimgeour projected determination even when circumstances offered little reason for optimism. Harry first encountered him at the Burrow during Christmas of 1996. The minister hoped to use Harry as a symbol of public confidence. Posters, newspaper stories, and official appearances could strengthen morale. Harry refused. He believed the ministry cared more about appearances than effective action. Their conversation revealed a growing divide between political leadership and those directly confronting Voldemort's threat. Why do governments often become obsessed with symbols during crises? Because symbols are easier to manage than reality. Scrimgeour genuinely wanted to fight Voldemort, but he also understood the importance of public perception. If citizens believed the ministry remained strong, panic might be reduced. If Harry Potter publicly supported government efforts, confidence could increase. Yet confidence alone could not stop Death Eaters. Every attack exposed the limits of official authority. Every disappearance, murder, or infiltration reminded the public that the ministry was struggling to keep pace. The Death Eaters targeted more than individuals. They targeted trust. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and one of the ministry's most respected figures, was murdered. Her death shocked the wizarding community. If someone of her skill and influence could be eliminated, few people felt truly safe. The attack carried a message beyond the loss itself. Voldemort's followers wanted citizens to doubt the government's ability to protect them. In that respect, they were alarmingly successful. Meanwhile, Severus Snape's unbreakable vow with Narcissa Malfoy set another chain of events in motion. Draco Malfoy received a mission from Voldemort: assassinate Albus Dumbledore. Throughout Harry's 6th year at Hogwarts, Draco struggled to repair the vanishing cabinet that connected Borgin and Burkes to the Room of Requirement. The task seemed isolated from ministry affairs, yet it demonstrated a broader truth. While officials focused on public security, Death Eaters were quietly exploiting overlooked vulnerabilities. The greatest threats often entered through doors nobody realized were open. The ministry's position deteriorated further after Dumbledore's death atop the Astronomy Tower in June 1997. For decades, Dumbledore had functioned as a stabilizing force within Wizarding Britain. He was not Minister for Magic, but his influence often rivaled that of ministers. His defeat of Grindelwald in 1945, his leadership at Hogwarts, and his role in resisting Voldemort gave him immense moral authority. When he died, the psychological impact extended far beyond Hogwarts. A protective presence that had shaped an era was suddenly gone. Why did the ministry fall so quickly after that? The answer lies partly in infiltration. Voldemort understood that conquering a government directly would be difficult. Corrupting it from within was far easier. Key officials were placed under the Imperious Curse. Informants supplied intelligence, loyalists operated in secret. The ministry remained standing physically, but its foundations weakened steadily. By the time many leaders recognized the danger, the process was already advanced. The decisive blow came on August 1st, 1997. On that day, Death Eaters effectively seized control of the Ministry of Magic. Rufus Scrimgeour was captured, tortured, and killed after refusing to reveal Harry Potter's location. His final act reflected extraordinary courage. Voldemort gained information from many sources, but not from Scrimgeour. With the minister dead, the government lost both its leader and one of its strongest remaining defenders. The fall of the ministry was no longer a future possibility. It had happened. Yet something remarkable occurred. The ministry continued functioning. Lifts still moved between floors. Employees still reported to work. Departments still processed paperwork. Visitors still entered the building. From the outside, the institution appeared intact. This illusion was central to Voldemort's strategy. Open destruction attracts resistance. Familiar routines encourage compliance. The government remained recognizable, but its purpose had changed completely. Pius Thickness became Minister for Magic. Officially, he held the office legitimately. In reality, he operated under the Imperious Curse. True authority rested elsewhere. Voldemort preferred ruling from the shadows while maintaining a facade of normal governance. Many authoritarian regimes throughout history have relied upon similar methods. Laws remain, offices remain, procedures remain, yet the principles behind them are transformed. The ministry that emerged after August 1997 retained its structure while losing its soul. Within weeks, new policies revealed the extent of the change. Muggle-born witches and wizards faced investigation. Propaganda spread through official channels. Fear became embedded in administration itself. The institution originally created to protect Wizarding Britain from external threats was now being used to persecute its own citizens. Centuries of history had led to a grim paradox. The greatest danger facing the ministry no longer stood outside its walls. It sat behind ministerial desks, signed official documents, and controlled the machinery of government from within. As autumn settled across Britain and dark clouds gathered over Hogwarts, the ministry entered the most disturbing chapter in its entire history. The departments remained, the laws remained, the familiar green fires still burned in the fireplaces, yet beneath the appearance of continuity, a different regime had taken hold. The hidden government founded after the Statute of Secrecy had survived rebellions, dark wizards, and political crises. Now it faced something far more unsettling, becoming the instrument of the very tyranny it had been created to prevent. How fragile was wizarding democracy if a centuries-old government could be captured almost overnight? That question echoes through every corridor of the ministry during the dark months between August 1997 and May 1998. From a distance, the institution appeared stable. The atrium still welcomed employees. Interdepartmental memos still flew through the air. Wizards still arrived by Flu Network and ministry entrances. Yet beneath these familiar routines, the government had been transformed into an instrument of fear. The speed of that transformation revealed an uncomfortable truth. Systems that appear permanent can change rapidly when enough authority becomes concentrated in the wrong hands. Under Pius Thickness's nominal leadership and Voldemort's hidden control, the ministry launched one of the most notorious initiatives in its history, the Muggle-born Registration Commission. Official propaganda claimed that Muggle-born witches and wizards had somehow stolen magic from real magical families. The accusation was absurd. Centuries of magical history demonstrated that magical ability could emerge in non-magical families just as squibs could be born into wizarding households. Yet facts mattered less than political utility. The commission provided a mechanism for identifying, interrogating, and persecuting citizens. Government paperwork became a weapon. Harry Potter witnessed the system firsthand when he, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger infiltrated the ministry using Polyjuice Potion. Disguised as ministry employees, they entered a building that felt simultaneously familiar and corrupted. New statues dominated the atrium. The golden fountain of magical brethren that Harry had seen during earlier visits was gone. In its place stood a monument called Magic is Might. Enormous witches and wizards sat upon carved thrones made from the bodies of muggles. The symbolism was unmistakable. Where the old fountain had projected harmony between magical beings, the new monument celebrated domination. Why do authoritarian governments place such emphasis on symbols? Because symbols teach citizens how power wishes to be perceived. Every visitor entering the ministry encountered Magic is Might before conducting any official business. The statue communicated hierarchy, superiority, and obedience without requiring a single spoken word. Throughout history, governments have understood that architecture, monuments, and public imagery shape collective memory. Voldemort's regime recognized this principle immediately. Controlling laws was important. Controlling imagination was equally valuable. The Muggle-born Registration Commission hearings exposed the human cost of these policies. During one session, Hermione witnessed Mary Cattermole being interrogated by Dolores Umbridge and ministry officials. Mary insisted truthfully that she was a witch. The commission treated her as a criminal regardless. Evidence became irrelevant because the verdict had effectively been decided beforehand. The proceedings resembled a legal system while abandoning many of its underlying principles. This distinction matters. Tyranny often works most effectively when it imitates legitimacy. Dolores Umbridge flourished in this environment. Her behavior during the previous administration had already demonstrated devotion to authority and control. Under Voldemort's regime, those tendencies became even more dangerous. She wore Salazar Slytherin's locket Horcrux without understanding its true nature. She presided over hearings. She enforced discriminatory policies. Yet Umbridge remains fascinating because she was not a Death Eater. She did not serve Voldemort out of ideological devotion in the same way Bellatrix Lestrange did. Instead, she represented a different danger, the bureaucrat who enables oppression because it aligns with personal beliefs and institutional ambition. While the ministry descended into darkness, resistance continued beyond its walls. The Order of the Phoenix remained active. Hogwarts students eventually organized renewed opposition through Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood. Underground communication networks spread information. Families hid fugitives. The wizarding world was discovering that governments possess immense power, but they do not possess absolute control. Every regime depends upon cooperation. When enough people refuse to cooperate, cracks begin to appear. Why did Voldemort ultimately fail, despite controlling the Ministry, Hogwarts, and much of Wizarding Britain? The answer extends beyond military strategy. Voldemort excelled at inspiring fear. He struggled to inspire genuine loyalty beyond his closest followers. Harry Potter, by contrast, inspired trust. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Arthur Weasley, Minerva McGonagall, Remus Lupin, Molly Weasley, and countless others fought not because they were compelled to do so, but because they believed certain principles deserved protection. Governments can command obedience. They cannot easily manufacture conviction. The final collapse of Voldemort's ministry began during the events leading to the Battle of Hogwarts. Harry, Ron, and Hermione destroyed multiple Horcruxes. Allies gathered from across the magical world. House elves led by Kreacher joined the fight. Centaurs emerged from the Forbidden Forest. Even groups historically distrustful of wizard governments chose to oppose Voldemort. The coalition that formed around Hogwarts was larger than any ministry. It represented a defense of the entire wizarding community against domination. On May 2nd, 1998, the battle reached its conclusion. Voldemort entered the Great Hall, believing himself invincible. Harry revealed the truth about the Elder Wand. The final killing curse rebounded just as it had in Godric's Hollow years earlier. This time there would be no return. Lord Voldemort died. His followers scattered, surrendered, or were captured. The regime controlling the ministry collapsed almost immediately. A government that had seemed overwhelmingly powerful only days earlier dissolved once the fear sustaining it disappeared. What remained afterward was a difficult question that every post-war society must confront. How do you rebuild trust after institutions have been corrupted? The answer would not come quickly. Laws required revision, investigations needed conducting, victims deserved justice, public confidence had to be restored. The ministry survived the war physically, but survival alone was not enough. The institution needed transformation. Into that uncertain moment stepped Kingsley Shacklebolt, former Auror, member of the Order of the Phoenix, and one of the most respected defenders of the anti-Voldemort resistance. Kingsley became interim minister for magic and later assumed the position permanently. His appointment marked more than a change of leadership. It symbolized a return to legitimacy. Unlike the ministers who had denied threats or been manipulated by them, Kingsley came to office with first-hand experience of the ministry's failures. He understood both its strengths and its vulnerabilities. As dawn began breaking over post-war Britain, ministry workers once again walked through the atrium. The enchanted fireplaces still glowed. The lifts still moved between levels. Memos still drifted overhead like pale birds crossing invisible currents. Yet everything felt different. 1,000 years of history, from the Wizards' Council through the Statute of Secrecy, through wars against Grindelwald and Voldemort, through triumphs and mistakes alike, had revealed a simple truth. The Ministry of Magic was never merely a building beneath London. It was a reflection of the people who filled its offices, wrote its laws, challenged its failures, and struggled generation after generation to decide what kind of society they wished to protect. When you look back across the 1,000 years that led to the Ministry of Magic, what becomes most striking is that the story is not really about government at all. It is about a question that appears again and again throughout Rowling's world. What happens when people try to turn something living into something controllable? The founders of Hogwarts built a school to preserve knowledge, yet their disagreements echoed for centuries. The ministry was created to preserve secrecy, yet secrecy demanded more laws, more offices, more authority. Each generation believed it had found a stable solution to the problems inherited from the previous one. And each generation eventually discovered that no structure, however impressive, can permanently solve the oldest difficulties of human nature. Power in this history behaves almost like a magical artifact. It attracts those who wish to use it wisely and those who wish to possess it completely. Ulick Gamp needed power to build a government capable of protecting wizarding Britain. Grogan Stump needed power to reform laws. Aurors needed power to oppose dark wizards. Yet Voldemort sought the same thing. The difference was never found in the power itself. It was found in the purpose behind it. Rowling returns to this idea repeatedly throughout the series. Magic amplifies character rather than replacing it. The Elder Wand does not create wisdom. A ministerial office does not create virtue. The person holding authority ultimately matters more than the authority they hold. Fear follows a similar pattern. Throughout ministry history, fear often arrived wearing the mask of responsibility. Officials feared exposure before the statute of secrecy. They feared goblin rebellions, they feared werewolves, dark wizards, public panic, political instability, and social disorder. Sometimes those fears were justified, sometimes they were not. Yet the most damaging decisions frequently emerged when fear became more important than truth. The ministry's treatment of Sirius Black, its refusal to believe Harry Potter, and its willingness to persecute Muggle-borns all grew from the same root. Fear narrows vision. It encourages certainty when uncertainty would be wiser. It tempts institutions to protect themselves rather than the people they were created to serve. And yet fear is never the strongest force in this world. The Department of Mysteries understood that long before most politicians did. Deep beneath the ministry, the unspeakables devoted entire chambers to studying death, time, and thought. But even they regarded love as the greatest mystery of all. That is not a sentimental detail hidden inside the story. It is the story. Lily Potter's sacrifice, Harry's choices, Dumbledore's regrets, Snape's loyalty, and even the courage of ordinary witches and wizards all point toward the same conclusion. The most powerful forces shaping history are rarely the ones governments can regulate. No law created Harry's willingness to walk into the Forbidden Forest. No decree created Neville Longbottom's courage. No ministry invented loyalty. Perhaps that is why the ministry survives when so many individual leaders fail. Its history is not a steady rise toward perfection. It stumbles, it overlooks dangers, it becomes corrupted. At times it even becomes an instrument of oppression. Yet it also contains people who refuse to surrender their conscience. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Amelia Bones, Arthur Weasley, and countless unnamed employees remind us that institutions are never merely buildings or departments. They are collections of choices made every day by ordinary people. The ministry's greatest strength was never its laws, its prisons, or its bureaucracy. It was the willingness of individuals to defend what those things were supposed to represent. And so, as this long journey comes to rest, you find yourself once more beneath the streets of London. The lifts move quietly through the depths. Green fire flickers inside distant fireplaces. Somewhere far above, rain taps softly against the city. In the vast atrium, enchanted paper memos drift through the air like pale birds crossing an underground sky. And for a moment you can almost imagine that every one of them carries a fragment of the 1,000 years that came before. The ministers are gone. The wars are over. The voices have faded into history. Yet the memos continue their slow flight through the warm golden light, circling endlessly through the hidden heart of the wizarding world.